Thank you everyone for joining us. We're super thrilled to have you here tonight for our program, The Eclectic History, Village Preservation South of Union Square Proposed Historic District. I'm thrilled that we will be sharing the evening with some of my esteemed colleagues. And I am just going to do a very brief introduction. My name is Leanne G. Bowley. I am the new Director of Programming at Village Preservation, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here. And I have in the background, you'll see my colleague Hugh Evans, who is doing some link dropping for you all so that you can, and there's Hugh, they're dropping some links in the chat. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to put questions in the chat or the Q&A. We will hold most of those till the end and moderate those. You'll notice everyone is muted and off screen for this presentation. We just find that's the kind of best way to do things. But you can chat at any time. So we do encourage that. A little bit about Village Preservation. We were founded in the 80s and have since been working really hard to help the Village, NoHo, and the East Village and the West Village to keep its loveliness in many different ways. So we do this through zoning, kind of advocacy. We do this through preservation, which you'll hear a lot about tonight. And we also do it through events like this that are free and open to the public. We're very pleased that you'll join us, and we'll talk some more about what's coming up in March and other ways you can get involved. In the chat, you'll likely see a link to find out about membership and donations. So we encourage you to check those things out. But in the meantime, we're here tonight to talk about our wonderful South of Union Square Proposed Historic District. So I have my colleague Anna and Sarah here who will introduce themselves, and we're very pleased that they will join us tonight, and I will turn it over to both of you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Marcum, and I am the Director of Research and Preservation at Village Preservation. I started here back in July of 2021, so I'm relatively new to the organization. But one of the biggest projects we've been working on since I started here is our proposed South of Union Square Historic District. Today, we're going to go into our history and involvement in advocating for the history of this area and for designation. So get excited, we're about to dig in. Next. The proposed South of Union Square Historic District contains a remarkable concentration of sites connected to our state and nation civil rights history, to prominent and impactful social justice movements, and to art, literature, music, photography, film, dance, and publishing. What makes the area particularly unique is the marriage of social justice movements, artistic movements, and commerce, not only existing side by side, but often intertwined, with the boundaries between each blurred. Civil rights organizations have their main office headquarters here and directed campaigns from here, while also powerfully utilizing the arts as a tool for spreading their message. Artists use the canvas, the printed word, and their instruments as a means to advance the message for social justice and equity. Loft buildings were built for and house some of the most important and radically transformative publishers in America, which fought battles against censorship and pushed the boundaries of acceptable social and political discourse in American society, as well as recording studios, where some of the first integrated musical recordings were made and were transformative artistic, especially African Americans made some of their first and most important recordings. Thus, this area is where arts and culture were not only made, but displayed and manufactured. The early film industry was also located here, as were several other pioneering movie houses, which transformed the way the country saw this art form. Next. Our organization has hosted several rallies and public meetings to spread awareness of the development threat to this area, including a 2018 rally to save the historic St Denis Hotel designed by James Renwick Jr., which was sadly demolished in 2019. James Renwick Jr., who was born on November 1st, 1818, and lived until 1895, was one of the 19th century's most prolific most prolific and successful American architects. Renwick is best known for his mastery of the Gothic Revival and Romanesque styles, as evidenced in his masterworks, Grace Church, which is also in the district, St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue, St. Patrick's Cathedral on Fifth Avenue, and the Smithsonian Institute on Washington, D.C.'s Mall. There are at least 6 extant James Renwick Jr. buildings south of Union Square. The St. Denis Hotel, completed in 1853, stood at the corner of East 11th and Broadway. The property, which was owned by the Renwick family, had been given to them by their relative Henry Brevoort, a successful farmer and prominent landowner during the late 18th century. The hotel, named after its first proprietor, Dennis Julian, and its style was derived from Elizabethan and Renaissance models. These revival styles and the eclectic architecture in the district that they created are one of the character-defining features of the neighborhood south of Union Square. While it has frequently been said that one of the issues with south of Union Square being deemed a historic district is that the district is not cohesive enough, the eclecticism is really what makes this neighborhood special. The St. Denis was said to be one of the handsomest buildings on Broadway, occupying 76 feet of the street front, and of that street front, and 120 feet on the 11th Street front, as said in Miller's New York. The St. Denis Hotel was one of the first buildings in New York to utilize terracotta as an exterior architectural ornament. It was host to numerous historical figures over the course of its lifetime, including President Abraham Lincoln, First Lady Mary Todd Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, Mark Twain, Roscoe Conkling, Chester A. Arthur, P.T. Barnum, and Sarah Bernhardt. In 1877, Alexander Graham Bell had his first public demonstration in New York of the telephone. In 1917, after 64 years of operation, the St. Denis Hotel was closed and the building was converted to offices. The reason for its demise was the surrounding neighborhood's changing character. What had once been New York's most fashionable, more residential neighborhood had become a much less refined mix of industry and commerce and entertainment geared toward the masses. In February 1920, the Renwick family, who had owned the property for years, finally sold it. Though the building, which stood until 2019, was stripped of much of its original ornament after the conversion, the St. Denis' final 100 years as an office building were not without distinction. You might have seen in our description today that we'll be talking a lot about how American art history is deeply intertwined with the neighborhood south of Union Square. It's also deeply intertwined with the building that used to be the St. Denis Hotel. Marcel Duchamp kept a studio here for the last 20 years of his life. And in absolute secrecy, and worked in absolute secrecy on his final masterpiece, the Étant Donné. After Duchamp's death on October 2nd, 1968, his close friends in the world were stunned to find this work hidden in his studio in suite number 403. In 2018, after the City Council approved Mayor de Blasio's requested upzoning for the nearby construction of a tech hub on 14th Street, and local council member Carlina Rivera failed to deliver on her promise to her constituents that she would only support this upzoning if there were landmark designations protections provided to the area. Unfortunately, we never received that designation for this hotel. In late 2018, after the plans were announced to demolish the historic building to make way for another tech-related development, Village Preservation staged a protest outside the building, attended by hundreds of local residents. Unfortunately, in 2019, the city allowed the more than 165-year-old St. Denis Hotel to be demolished in spite of our efforts. Thankfully, there are several other Renwick designed buildings in the neighborhood that could still be saved and preserved for future generations with landmark protections. Next. Other James Renwick buildings in the area include 3941 East 10th Street, the Lancaster, which is notable as an early surviving example of the French flat or middle-class apartment building in New York City. Built in 1887, when this was still a prestigious residential address, The land cluster was clearly an attempt to attract and retain a more sophisticated resident of means. The facade combines elements from two then emerging styles in residential architecture, Queen Anne and Colonial Revival. The building on the right is the Renwick, which is at 806, 808 Broadway, 104, 106 4th Avenue. And it is a striking loft building running the entire block from Broadway to 4th Avenue behind Renwick's other more famous design, Grace Church, which was designed in 1887. Well, Grace Church wasn't designed in 1887, the loft building was. Grace Church was much earlier. Despite the fact that it was designed to be a utilitarian structure for offices, storage, and manufacturing, the building features vivid Gothic detail throughout and along with industrial Romanesque detailing on the 4th Avenue facade, beautifully intact cast iron storefronts, and Art Nouveau style ironwork over the doorway and entry to the Broadway elevation. This is a really exceptional cluster of Renwick works that provides an unrivaled example of his skill as an architect, which is exceptionally valuable because we don't have a great number of his buildings left today. Next. Not necessarily his buildings left today, but his archival plans, drawings, sketches, notes. So the best way that we can get to know his work is through the buildings that were actually constructed. And as you can see here, these are all within mere blocks of each other. And they've also been built throughout really the entirety of his career. You have buildings from as early as the Grace Church rectory around 1846, 1847, Grace Church in 1843, and going all the way up to 1887. So that's really an architectural historian's dream for this particular architect. Next. In March 2019, Village Preservation commissioned Anthony W. Robbins to write Finishing the Job, the Unprotected Architecture and History of Greenwich Village and the East Village below Union Square. This, along with ongoing advocacy, helped lead the Landmarks Preservation Commission to landmark 7 buildings along Broadway between 12th and 13th Streets in June 2019. These buildings include, as you will see on your screen left to right, 827, 831 Broadway, which was landmarked in 2017 prior to this particular movement. 817, 826, and 830 Broadway, which were landmarked in 2019. 832, 832, let me see, apologies. 832, 836, and 841 Broadway were also landmarked, which is really exciting. And even though it's a small step forward, we still need to remember that this only protects about 3.5% of the buildings in the district that we called for landmarking and that are deserving of landmarking. Nearly 97% of the historic buildings in this area are completely unprotected. In May of 2021, however, we were happy to learn that 75th Avenue, the last building on the right on the bottom row, was landmarked as it was the former headquarters for the NAACP and a significant building in African-American history. Throughout Village Preservation's initiative to create a South of Union Square historic district, we have collected nearly 60 letters of support for landmarking this district from elected officials, scholars, writers, academics, preservationists, civil rights organizations, and even the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Village Preservation has submitted 12 extensive requests for evaluation, all of which are available on our website, and you should be able to find a link to our advocacy page in the chat if you guys would like to take a look. Extensive requests for evaluation to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission since 2018. And coming up later this year, we plan on submitting even more requests for evaluation with a great deal of the research that we have been talking about already, that we will be talking about in our program today. But the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation determined that this area, the South of Union Square Historic District, was eligible for National Register of Historic Places designation in September of 2021. This was a huge accomplishment in our effort, and also really shows to the Landmarks Preservation Commission of New York City that we really do have something of great value here and it needs to be paid attention to. Next. This neighborhood can be characterized as a true crossroads, where art, politics, industry, commerce, the New York elite, and the working class collided to create an eclectic built environment and cultural ferment emblematic of New York City's status as America's cultural capital and melting pot. Architecturally, this neighborhood possesses a rare collection of buildings designed by some of the 19th and 20th century's leading American architects, like James Renwick Jr., who we discussed earlier in this presentation, Emery Roth, Henry J. Hardenberg, John Kellum, R.H. Robertson, Carrere and Hastings, Shreve Lamb Blake, Thomas Lamb, David Jardine of D&J Jardine, Albert Wagner, Louis Korn, George B. Post, Griffith Thomas, Harvey Wiley Corbett, Wallace K. Harrison, Hines and Lafarge, and Napoleon Lebrun. Just to name a few, there are more. I know a lot of you might not be believing me. A number of contiguous historic streetscapes illustrate the uniquely varied uses and aesthetics of this neighborhood, and a number of beautifully intact late 19th and early 20th century loft buildings, as well as other types of commercial, residential, and institutional architecture really define this area. The neighborhood south of Union Square bore witness to great leaps forward in so many amazing social, political, industrial, literary, musical, artistic, and cultural movements. The African American and LGBTQ civil rights movements catalyzed here, the artists of the 14th Street School and the New York Street School, not New York Street, excuse me, the New York School, who were integral to elevating American art to the global stage and shifting the center of the art world to New York, kept studios here and were inspired by their architectural surroundings, particularly the 14th Street School, who we will be discussing a little bit later. Get excited. They really elevated to the global stage the shifting center of the art world to New York, and countless writers, publishers, including trailblazers who changed the course of feminist literary and legal history, lived and worked in the buildings still standing on these blocks today. While the neighborhood south of Union Square shares much of the same architectural character as nearby Greenwich Village, such as the 19th century row houses, mid-19th century commercial buildings, and later 19th century institutional buildings, its overall character is distinctive. In particular, the neighborhood south of Union Square was chiefly developed in the latter half of the 19th century, as New York City was rapidly growing and striving to solidify its station as a world-class city. The area south of Union Square is truly a proto-mixed-use neighborhood, bringing together residential, commercial, social, and political life, along with their corresponding buildings, to one central hub. The greater prevalence of commercial buildings in the area south of Union Square allowed for the mid to late 20th century adaptive reuse of these buildings as soaring lofts and artist studios. Geographically and chronologically, the area's building stock falls roughly into three groupings: early to mid 19th century row houses and related buildings scattered throughout the proposed district, but located more densely between 4th and 3rd Avenues, late 19th century commercial buildings along University Place, Broadway, and 4th Avenue, and early 20th century apartment buildings and hotels along University Place, Broadway, and 5th Avenue. The area's metamorphosis into a mixed-use neighborhood led to several commercial conversions of old row houses, and many of them have been altered over the years. However, the exteriors still retain a great deal of architectural integrity. This neighborhood also welcomed a great deal of department stores like Stewart's and McCurry's, located within this neighborhood. And by the late 1880s and early 1890s, several 8-story loft buildings were built just blocks within the blocks just south of Union Square. The significance of this neighborhood lies in the mixed use of its buildings. Historic purpose-built residential, commercial, and industrial structures are evident throughout this area. Next. So what now? We have here a bird's eye view of the proposed, of the rough outlines of a proposed South of Union Square historic district. How can we make a greater effort to landmark this neighborhood? How can we make our case even more engaging than it already is to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission? Because if you ask me, we've submitted quite a bit of amazing research that really provides a convincing argument as to why we need to protect this neighborhood. This program is the first in a series of programs about our ongoing research and history in the neighborhood south of Union Square. We hope to be doing more of these throughout the year while we're releasing new tranches of research and talking about new subjects on our blog pertinent to the neighborhood south of Union Square. Every day, we are finding and adding new information about this neighborhood to our virtual village map, which hopefully Hugh or Leanne will add to our chat just now. And we're hoping that you guys will be able to find lots of really interesting information in there and really, you know, just spread the word about how important this district is and how we're working to make sure that landmark status is extended to the entire area. Recently, Sarah Eccles, the Research and Preservation Associate at Village Preservation, recently, Sarah and I have been doing a great deal of research into the subjects you'll be hearing more about tonight. The connection between the labor movement and loft buildings in the area, which Sarah will talk about shortly, and the influence of the neighborhood's intact streetscapes on the development of American art history. I'll be talking about that after Sarah shares with you a little bit more information about the labor movement and loft buildings. So without further ado, we have Sarah Eccles, our Research and Preservation Associate, speaking now. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you in a bit.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Anna. So as Anna said, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the lofts, labor, and industrial history that we have here in the area south of Union Square. I got to spend a lot of my time researching the connections between the trailblazing people and institutions and groups that worked in this area and many of the still intact, striking buildings that are here. So before the south of Union Square became an industrial area, it was divided into many large tracts of land. Of course, before that, it was the indigenous land of the Lenape, which we've written about pretty extensively on our blogs. But then the Dutch parceled up that land, eventually selling it off to the owners we can see here on this map. Those owners then went on to sell this land in the mid and late 19th century, and they sold it off for the development. The development is visible through the many lofts, tenements, and department stores that exist in this area that are dispersed amidst the row houses, churches, and middle-class apartment houses that already existed in this area and weren't displaced despite the industrial movement that was coming towards this area. As the development of the city was moving northward, this area attracted many of the city's prominent business owners. Next. One such prominent business owner was James McCurry. James McCurry was an Irish immigrant, and he opened the James McCurry dry goods store in 1868. He strategically placed this across from Grace Church to attract the parish's wealthier clientele, but he kept his prices low as to not alienate those who couldn't afford the wealthier possessions that the Grace Church's attendees could. The beautifully constructed cast iron building that housed the dry goods store still stands on the corner of 4th Avenue and 11th Street across from Grace Church. Other prominent industries and businesses in the area included the American Felt Company, a major player in the piano industry at 114 East 13th Street. The offices of the famed Bloomingdale's was at 78 Fifth Avenue, and the Biograph Company, a motion picture studio that was responsible for patenting a crucial piece of cinema technology that made going to see motion pictures possible in the early 20th century. And that was located at 841 Broadway, which Village Preservation was actually really responsible for getting landmarked. Next. This area was also a major attraction for many civil rights, labor, and leftist groups in the 1920s and 30s. One of the most prominent leaders in the area who fought for labor rights was the International Workers' Orders. This fraternal organization had its roots in the Jewish People's Order. The IWO fought not just for workers' rights, but for racial equality in the 1930s. They were advocating for the integration of the workplace. They advocated for Black History Week and for fair wages. They were located at 85th Avenue, the 16-story loft building that we can see on the northern end of this block here. And they were just one block away from the NAACP headquarters at 75th Avenue, another building that we fought hard to get landmarked, also within this area. The NAACP is a powerful organization that has been striving for Black equality since 1914. Other organizations in this area include the National Gay Task Force, also located at 85th Avenue, the United States Communist Party, located at 35 East 12th Street, the Textile Workers Union of America at 97 University Place, and the Transport Workers Union of America at 109 East 12th Street. The area became a touchstone for the civil rights, labor unions, and leftist organizations due to its many lofts where many of their members worked and the tenements where they lived, and due to its proximity to Union Square, where many of these workers were able to assemble, and where the first Labor Day parade was eventually held. Next. The architecture and construction of the lofts within this area are particularly striking. Here we can see an array of different lofts that Anna listed most of the architects earlier. As these lofts were constructed for industrial and commercial use, the developers of the building were trying to attract high prices for their loft space. They regularly took out ads detailing their new construction, their floor space, their modern buildings in the newspapers in the 20th century. And many of these 20th century lofts range typically from 8 to 16 stories, 16 stories being the tallest at the 85th Avenue here. The lofts, some of which we have represented here, designed by Buchman and Fox, Albert Wagner, Starrett and Van Vleck. And many of the lofts in this area were constructed during the rise of the general contracting profession, which also allowed for a more streamlined and organized construction. So what we see here is not only an organization of the architects, but of the construction and the laborers coming together within this one area, and it's all held together through these buildings that have stood the test of time. So I can pass it back over to Anna now, who's going to talk more to you about the culture and the arts.
Hello, everyone. I'm back. So today we're going to start looking at this beautifully intact streetscape at 5th Avenue and West 14th Street. This is just between West 14th Street and West 13th Street. We have numbers 72 through 80 5th Avenue here to really take a look at and see how great this sort of contiguous block front is. All of these were built prior to 1911 when a new zoning code was passed, trying to essentially discourage the construction of more commercial, not necessarily commercial, but more industrial loft type spaces, and keep 5th Avenue a more retail heavy, genteel stretch. So it's interesting to kind of look at these and see how they both fit within that zoning guideline and sort of see how they defy it in many ways. All of these are extant to their original design. They're located on the west side of the avenue, and the buildings on this block front were designed by some of the notable architects that I mentioned earlier: Albert Wagner, Buckman and Fox, Maynick and Frank, and Cleverton and Putzel, excuse me. They were loft and office buildings, which had retail on the bottom. They were designed in the Neo-Renaissance, Renaissance Revival, and Romanesque Revival styles. These 4 buildings have been miraculously preserved over the last 100 years. I did some survey photography in the area the other day, and it really is astonishing to see how well taken care of these buildings are, despite the fact that they don't have a preservation ordinance, which is truly amazing. However, that's not the kind of protection that we can rely on in the years to come or really going forward. That's simply good luck. And so they represent so many significant architectural styles at the turn of the century, new construction methodologies, changing dynamics within the city, and really show us an interesting time when the neighborhood south of Union Square was really embodying all of the different sort of uses and really true mixed use nature of the neighborhood at this time. Next. So how does this relate to the arts? An incredible array of sites in this area are connected to the great artists and art movements of the last century and a half. In the 20th century, this area was home to artists of the 14th Street School, which makes quite a bit of sense considering this is the neighborhood south of Union Square. It's their namesake school, who were instrumental in raising the profile of American art to the global stage, and to the New York School of Artists, who are arguably much more well-known in contemporary American art history. But they are the ones who really were at the forefront when the global art world center shifted from Paris to New York. At the beginning of the 20th century, American art was really still struggling to be seen as legitimate among artists of the Western world. The pivotal role of the 14th Street School and the pivotal role of the 14th Street School artists is inextricably linked to this neighborhood. These artists, informally led by Kenneth Hayes Miller, who did the work in the center that you'll see on your screen, and along with other artists such as Reginald Marsh, who lived and worked in the neighborhood at 11 East 12th Street, Paul Cadmus, Mary Fife Laning, Edward Laning, Minna Citron, and Isabelle Bishop, who we'll talk about in a moment, defined urban realist painting, printmaking, and sculpture at this time. The subject matter of their work examined seemingly common occurrences in the daily life of their immediate surroundings. The importance of the cityscape and street life south of Union Square is unparalleled in the development of the American avant-garde modernism movement during the interwar period between the 1920s and 1940s. This is one of the many reasons that we are advocating so strongly for landmark designation of this district. 14th Street at this time was commonly referred to as the poor man's Fifth Avenue, meaning you could go to, it was a bustling center for bargain shopping, body entertainment, burlesque shows, movie theaters, and things that would generally appeal to the average working class New Yorker and American as a whole. Building on the work of the Ashcan School painters, who are more closely linked to Greenwich Village. So again, village preservation, just your hotspot for American art history. Building on the work of the Ashcan School painters, they continue to depict modern urban subjects in the manner of Renaissance art, but they replaced the Ashcan School's sort of painterly idealism of sort of New York City urbanism and sometimes the poverty of the tenements, and replaced it with a real incisive grit and essentially a critique of American consumer culture. Next. Isabelle Bishop was one of the more influential members of the 14th Street School. She was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and moved to New York in 1918 to study illustration at the New York School of Applied Design for Women. After 2 years, she enrolled at the Art Students League, where she studied with Kenneth Hayes Miller, Guy Pinet Dubois, and Robert Henry. Her studies with Kenneth Hayes Miller ultimately helped position her as a leader of the 14th Street School. In 1926, she moved into a study at 9 West 14th Street, which unfortunately is no longer extant, that looked out onto 14th Street and Fifth Avenue. What you'll see here is the building on the far right, this historic structure here with the 2 red squares. Those 2 red squares are denoting the building that was once Hearn's department store. And Isabelle Bishop's studio was directly across the street from there. So all day when she would look out her window, she would see, the shop girls taking their breaks, women coming in and shopping. So it was really a great place to see bustling daily life on 14th Street. So the Hearn's department store location is at 6 West 14th Street. And really this subject matter that she witnessed every single day here became her primary subject matter. So she was really well known for depicting women on their lunch breaks, fixing their makeup, which at the time, acknowledging that a woman wore makeup and would fix it in public was seen in many ways as gauche. But it was also radical in some ways to see that everyday intimate moment in such a public space. And also she just depicted them doing general things like chatting with their friends or decompressing after a long day of helping customers. As historian Ellen Wiley Todd describes in her book, The New Woman, Painting and Gender Politics on 14th Street, the new woman of the 1920s and 30s was a moderate sort, hoping to capitalize on new job possibilities and make herself attractive with the mass-produced products of the clothing and cosmetics industry. This became such rich subject matter for Isabelle Bishop. The entrance to the Hearn's department store right across the street from this studio really, was just an amazing introduction to that for her. Hearn's department store was founded on West 14th between 5th and 6th Avenue in 1879. Unlike other popular stores on 14th Street in the 1920s and 30s that specialized in women's fashion and accessories, Hearn's was a full-service department store with homewares and fine linens available alongside the latest women's ready-to-wear fashion. While the woman as insatiable consumer archetype was certainly not new to art, the woman as independent consumer with her own money earned through office, clerical, and retail jobs was. The Hearn shopper became an important subject in Bishop's earliest paintings after moving into her live-work studio at 9 West 14th Street, the studio right across the street from Hearn's. Not only because Bishop was influenced by her mentor, Kenneth Hayes Miller, who frequently depicted these subjects as well, but because she had a direct line of observation to the constant stream of Hearn's patrons from her studio window. Bishop's Hearn's department store, 14th Street shoppers, 1927, painted in tandem with her enrollment in Kenneth Hayes Miller's mural painting class at the Art Students League, clearly applies formal Renaissance composition and flat perspective to the very contemporary subject matter of urban middle-class shoppers dressed in the latest fashions that frequented Union Square shopping district for the latest deals. The painting I'm discussing, just in case you guys didn't notice, it's the painting on the left at the top of the screen. While fellow 14th Street School artists Kenneth Hayes Miller, Reginald Marsh, and Raphael Sawyer frequently depicted the new woman archetype through either a highly sexualized lens of judgment, desire, and sometimes pity, Isabelle Bishop approaches her subjects as peers with empathy. Ephemeral movements, exchanges, and moments of solitude are the primary subject matter of the paintings. all depicted in the dynamic style of painting that is slightly unfinished and tenuous. You'll really see this sort of development of style in her painting on the right, 14th Street. Again, both of these are really taking into account and really drawing on the historic built environment of the area. And her subject choice, and she's really taking this unfinished and tenuous dynamic style of painting that seems in some ways dingy, but is also glowing. Even in the paintings depicting office girls in a moment of relaxation while taking a quick 15, the energy and hope of upward mobility in the face of the mundane are apparent in the brushwork. You can really see how many of her paintings, when she's reached her mature style on the right, are essentially vibrating with energy. It's really cool and interesting to look at. Isabelle Bishop's painting style and subject choice are uniquely responsive to the historic buildings in this neighborhood. And that is part of the reason why we need to work so hard to continue to preserve the architectural integrity and historic built environment of this area today. There are so many other artists that I could talk about and discuss and really dig into with all of you. But we would love to get into some questions with everyone. So I'll bring on Sarah and either Leanne or Hugh to help us with questions and hopefully dig into a couple of thoughts you all had throughout the presentation.
Anna, thank you so much. I'm so blessed to work with such intelligent, lovely people who can teach us so much. So thank you for sharing this. So while people are feeding the questions, so everyone feel free to pop in your questions either into the chat or the Q&A, either one works. I have a question for you both. In your research, what was like your favorite or most surprising thing you found so far when you've been doing this great amount of research on this area?
Well, what I've really enjoyed is learning a lot about specific loft buildings and more utilitarian buildings that became sort of hotspots of artist studios. I've done a series of blog posts on the artist studios at 30 East 14th Street, which the list of amazing artists who kept studio space there for a long time. One of them was Kenneth Hayes Miller, that kept studio space in that building is just eons long. It was very interesting to learn that Kenneth Hayes Miller, the sort of patriarch of the 14th Street School movement, was also born into the Oneida community in upstate New York, which is a very interesting story if ever you have the time to sort of look into it. Lots of sort of utopian community and ideals and architecture going into that. So that was interesting to see in how he ended up depicting people in his own art. And another artist who kept a studio in 30 East 14th Street was Yasuo Kuniyoshi. And his art, he is a Japanese American artist. While he was active during World War II. While Japanese Americans were not interned on the East Coast, they were heavily monitored and censored. And it's really amazing to see how he continued to keep up his artistic practice throughout all of that unnecessary discrimination and throughout that heavy censorship in a way that really sort of draws on the confusion, not necessarily confusion, but the identity politics that come into thinking about how he considered himself to be so, he considered himself an American, and he was really wrestling with the policies that the American government was putting out there, and also sort of how he would rationalize that with his Japanese heritage. And that's really apparent in his artwork, and really getting to discover his personally, I was not aware of him until I started working here and doing research on this project. I am so grateful that I was able to learn about him. And we're so grateful that he, made this work in our neighborhoods. He had a really great retrospective at the Smithsonian a few years ago that now I am deeply upset that I missed. I wish I could turn back time for that. But really, 30 East 14th Street is a lot more pared down than a lot of the other buildings we talked about today. But it's interesting to me that the cultural significance of that building really elevated it in my eyes. And it has become one of my favorites to do research on. Sarah, do you have any?
Yeah, I'd say that my favorite really has been learning about the people that have lived and worked here, because it has just been constantly surprising, from finding a female structural engineer who worked in the early 1900s, and she designed all of the structural engineering for the Broad Exchange building and worked for one of the most formidable firms in the early 20th century, to even finding so many different narratives about Irish immigrants that, as an Irish immigrant myself, it's such a different story than I'm used to hearing about people coming here in the mid 19th century. It was people coming here with really nothing, making a lot of money for themselves, and really trying to not only lift up their fellow Irishmen, but this country and city around them that they came here to join. And they did all of that within this area. And it's just consistently been surprise after surprise with the people that we're finding here. And it's been really rewarding finding it.
I love that. Just in my brief time, I'm finding my research to be really fulfilling, and that you all do this all the time. That's really exciting. I'm just going to repeat. Someone asked for the name of the book, and Anna has put it in the chat that was mentioned, but I'll say it out loud for anyone who can't read the chat. Ellen Wiley Todd, sorry, I just moved. Ellen Wiley Todd describes that in her book, it's called New Women, Painting and Gender Politics on 14th Street. So that's in the chat, but if anyone needed to hear it, New Woman, Painting and Gender Politics on 14th Street. Keep those questions coming in. We do have about 10 more minutes for questions, but we have one more. What was the role, Scott asked, what was, oh, go ahead.
Let me just say one more thing about Ellen Wiley Todd's book. There is a free copy of it available online through the University of California Press ebooks collection. I will send that out to the whole audience right now. I just wanted to put that out there. It's not the most easily readable interface, but it's also, if you're looking for any type of specific information or just kind of want to dig in at a moment's notice, it's free and it's there. So just wanted to let y'all know.
Anna, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm just diving into digital archives of books, and that is a great resource. And we have a question from Scott on what was or is the role of NYU in the area?
We don't have as much NYU involvement in this area as we do in a lot of our other the other areas that we monitor. The building that was Hearn's department store right now is operated by the New School in Parsons. So when dealing with universities, we tend to, in this area, run into more of the New School and their buildings in the area. Sarah, you might have dealt with more NYU buildings in this area or anything like that. Has that occurred for you?
No, there's been no active. There was a school planned for 68 Fifth Avenue, but it didn't go ahead. So luckily, no interference that I've encountered.
Also, I saw in the chat one question. Somebody was asking what the image is that is my background. The image in the background is one of the 14th Street School artists, and it's the old elevated train on 14th Street, as painted by Edward Laning, one of the 14th Street School artists, and also another tenant of 30 East 14th Street. I meant to mention that in my opening remarks, but as I'm sure you all remember, there was a lot of information there. But yes, it's an Edward Laning painting. It's in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art. I don't believe it's on view right now, but that is the institution who holds it.
Amazing. So while we wait to see if there's any final questions, I have one more question. Could each of you say one of the top things that getting this, and it might be a repetition from before, but one of the top things that having this status would do for the south of Union Square area? Some of like, what is the benefit that we're fighting so hard for?
Well, I would say really just the benefit of having an official resource of research and information on all of these buildings, and also the legal requirement that they go through a much more strenuous approvals process to either demolish a building or significantly alter it, or even just do like some smaller but still substantial alterations. It really just provides the true benefit of oversight for these great historic buildings. And one of the biggest things that I've run into in talking about this potential district with people is that many people assume that the neighborhood south of Union Square is already landmarked because these buildings retain a remarkable amount of integrity, and they're just very grand. So really, I didn't realize that they weren't landmarked until I started working at Village Preservation, because I wasn't spending as much time in the neighborhood before, going into the office more frequently. But really, just having to go through the Landmarks Preservation Commission and take more time before starting on a large development, that gives preservationists and people trying to make sure that, sensitive development comes to the area, that gives us more time, which in all of my preservation training, I've been told, and also I've witnessed and experienced, the greatest resource in preservation is time. And if you have to go through more approvals and also work with a community board who sees these buildings every day, work with a staff preservationist at LPC, you're going to think more closely about what you want to do with this building. You're not just going to, build a cash cow luxury development and leave it. Because you're going to have to invest a lot more time and resources into going through those channels. So it really just provides the opportunity for people to learn more about the historic buildings in this area, and also provides an extra layer of protection and gives us more time to see if particular developments are sensitive to the area.
Yeah, time, I know on my community board, on the zoning committee, time is something we're always up against. So that sounds lovely. Sarah, anything else to add about kind of the practical side of all this hard work that you all are doing, what it could mean for us?
Yeah, Anna covered a lot of it, but I think, we talked quite a bit about that block front between 13th and 14th Street on Fifth Avenue on the eastern side. And I think, that was one of the first kind of realizations of how intact these streetscapes are. And it happens to be one of my particular favorites. And one of the most striking things to me about that block front is everything you see there was completed as it stands today in 1911. And when you realize that in 2022, and it becomes a lot more significant. So everything Anna said, when you begin to understand how long these buildings have been standing, untouched, unaltered, and serving this community readily and happily, it begins to have a lot more weight. And that's really what we're trying to carry out here.
Mhm.
That's great. I love it. So no more questions have popped in. So we'll just give one more moment for anyone with that burning question that you're still typing in. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go back slowly through these slides that were so beautiful and get to the end where we have a QR code. So if you're using a mobile device but have another one handy, you can pull it up to the screen and use the QR code to get to our website to find out more about all of these initiatives that we're doing, as well as becoming a member. And as Anna mentioned, we're going to be doing these starting in April, hopefully monthly. We'll be having events around this topic. And so we hope you'll come back and join us. Also, our March events have been posted, so check those out. We have some exciting things coming up. And also just continue to visit us. Our website has a lot of wonderful blogs that Anna and Sarah have mentioned, as well as some resources that Hugh has put in the chat. So with that, I don't see any other questions. Any ending thoughts, Anna and Sarah?
Yes, I just want to make sure we've put these, hopefully, maybe we should send it once more, but we just want to make sure, if you haven't already, please be sure to sign up to send a letter to the City of New York supporting this landmarking initiative. We would really appreciate it. Also, be sure to take a look at the other resources we have on our website, such as our advocacy page, which has all of the requests for evaluation that we've submitted, as well as our virtual village, which is our amazing urban archive map that takes you on, I think we have over 40 now, historic walking tours and virtual tours of the South of Union Square Historic District. So be sure to check that out, and definitely, please, if you were at all, inspired to put your name behind this by the presentation, please be sure to sign up to send a letter if you have not already. Thank you.
Yes, and we're hearing a lot of support in the chat. And we'll also send an email with all of the links to everyone, as Hugh mentioned in the chat. So you have your chance now, you have your chance later. We'll definitely let you know. But thank you all for joining us tonight, learning a little bit more about this initiative, and a big thank you to Sarah and Anna for sharing what they've been learning. We look forward to doing more of these.
Okay. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Bye, take care.